good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome. You are here this evening with Autistic Parents UK, and Kieran Rose has joined me from his sick bed, so we're going to be gentle with him. And we're going to be here talking about internalised ableism and experiences of internalised ableism tonight. It is just Kieran and I, so I think what I'll do is I've got some questions and things that we'll go through, but I'll just keep an eye on the chat. So if you've got any questions or queries, anything, any comments that you want to join in on, then please feel free to just pop those in the chat as we go along, because I will be keeping. I'll kind of duck in and out of it, because if I leave the chat running up on the screen, it stops me from paying attention to what's going on. I always miss half of our webinars. We book these amazing people for the webinars, and then when they're busy, when the chat's busy, it means that I miss almost all of the content of the webinar. I have to go back and watch it later. We had Luke the other day, and he was marvellous. The bits that I heard were fantastic, but I missed loads of it because the chat was just.
I can't keep up with it either. I know how you
no. It was a one or the other type of thing. Yeah, but yeah. So I'll so feel free to pop stuff in the chat, and we'll duck in and out of it. But I will be checking it. Yeah. Several streams of input is definitely not something that my profile can manage. Okay, so now I'm not going to start off with a question about death, which is how I normally get Kieran in the Q&A. So I normally go straight in with the really hardcore stuff. But we are going to talk about parents. So how can I recognise and challenge internalised ableist beliefs that I may have inherited from my parents?
Wow. Yeah, we'll not start with death. We'll just start with the second slightly less easy
just how in the many ways that my parents messed me up, how can I
stop repeating those mistakes? Yeah. I mean, a really obvious one is when you find yourself saying the things that your parents said.
Yeah.
I have to catch myself a lot. Some of the things, not my dad so much, some of the things my mum said, I find myself repeating either to my children, like mid-sentence, I'll be like, oh my God, what am I saying? Or even the kind of the narratives that I tell myself and the things that I tell myself about. I think one of the biggest things that can support you with this is having good people around you who can catch you. Particularly when it's kind of, we're talking about internalized ableism, so that negative kind of self-talk and those voices that we hear that are quite often not our own, they're quite often other people's. And I don't mean that in a hearing voices sense, but the messages that we give ourselves come from other people quite often. And sometimes it's hard to discern where they've come from. So it's not just our parents that gives us these messages. Stigma comes from all sorts of different places around us, unfortunately. So having people around us that can help support us when we fall into that trap of internalized ableism, if we're tripping ourselves up, if we're talking about ourselves in negative ways, or, anything like that. So having someone there that can kind of go, hold on a sec, I don't think that's actually you speaking here. I think that's somebody else who's given you that, and that you're now repeating that self and beating yourself up about that. And it's not always just messages. It's that kind of the expectations and things like that as well. It's not always the kind of things people have said to us, but the expectations that we've perceived or that people have directly had for us, those things as well, they become our messages for ourselves, and they become our internalized narratives. And there's like a gazillion ways that we can beat ourselves up.
Yeah. I know one of the patterns that I recognize in myself, and actually I think I've done quite well at not passing on to my children, but I haven't done very well at overcoming it myself, is resting. I find it very hard to justify rest. And so I kind of only really allow myself to rest when the house is clean and tidy and all the children are occupied, and I can't rest if the vacuuming needs doing, and I can't rest if I know the dishwasher needs filling, and like really 1950s housewife stuff that frustrates me, and I catch myself mid, like I'm actually really tired, and I start to get frustrated at the other people in my house of why haven't they done this stuff. And it's like, because it's 8:30 and they're tired and they don't care and they could do it tomorrow, like anybody could. And you're all really tired and you've had enough, and it's all right to just rest. And yeah, that's a tricky one for me.
It's that narrative of laziness that we give ourselves, isn't it?
Massively. Yeah.
If you haven't achieved, if you haven't
Yeah.
done X, Y, and Z, you've not achieved. You're lazy.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very real feeling, I think, for a lot of us. And I think another way of kind of reframing that for ourselves is to really hardcore try and look through that lens of disability.
Yeah.
That firstly, there are things that sometimes we just cannot do, and that rightly or wrongly, or for whatever reason, there are just always going to be things that we cannot do. Some days you might be able to do them, but just because you can do them on some days doesn't mean you can do them all the days.
Yes.
And some things you'll never be able to do, some things you always need help with, and that's part of that disability narrative, which I think a lot of autistic people struggle to look at themselves through that lens. But it's a very real lens. There's not only social barriers, there's also a physical and emotional impact of that
Yeah.
as well, and there's stuff inside us which disables us as well. Our sensory processing and things can disable us, and it can impact on our energy levels and all of those kind of things. So I think that's the first kind of leveler to that. Secondly, we're talking about parents here, and you as well, Ruth. So you've got children that are responsible for. That
Yeah.
means that most of your spoons get poured into them.
Yeah.
So how much energy really are you going to have left in order to do the housework and do the cooking and do the this and do the that and do,
Yeah.
when you've got all those? And when I say your energy gets poured into them, I don't mean it gets poured into attention into them necessarily, although that's a part of it, but also the barriers that are around them.
Yeah.
Your spoons get poured into those barriers as well, and trying to help them navigate that and supporting them. And so that narrative of laziness is really problematic.
It's really hard, isn't
Really,
it?
really problematic. And I'm going to say the C word really early on. It's capitalism. That's all
Yeah.
it is. That sense of you have to be achieving. Either, if you're a man, you go out to work. We still have those narratives. You're a man, you go out
Yeah.
to work. If you're a woman, you have to have the house clean and tidy and the food on the table. And those things still exist. They're still very
Yeah.
much with us. And it's so, so problematic. And it's again, that's not necessarily a message that we've been directly given, but that's generational trauma still feeding its way
Yeah.
through, that we
Yeah.
carry around with us, those expectations that were given to us, so therefore we have them of ourselves.
Yes.
We are a failure if we don't meet those expectations.
Yeah. It's this idea, isn't it, that we need to earn rest.
Yeah,
That
it's a
rest has to
reward.
be, it's a reward. It has to be justified by hard work. And even if that were true, the ableism particularly, because I think that that's a societal message rather than a specific message. As you say, it's white society, it's part of capitalism. But even if that were true, the kind of the ableism part comes in understanding that, just as you're saying there, that for us, actually a lot of just existing and living day to day is actually we have earned our rest,
Mm.
even if we did need to earn it, which we don't. We have just by living another day, you
Yeah,
know.
I think the
Um,
mere fact that we exist in the way that we do means that we've earned our rest before many people have even started the day.
yeah,
And that's different for each of us, but for many of us that's very much the case. And it's the first couple of hours in the morning, that's a day's work within itself sometimes. And it's
yeah,
so the more you can kind of take control of, and the more you can exert a bit of influence over, the less impact that's going to have. And maybe that internalized narrative, that's trauma. That
yeah,
internalized ableism is trauma.
yeah,
And that's very much trauma messaging that we've received. And it's so, even if you do I've got lots of things, I've got loads of privilege, I've got lots of control over my life, I've exert my control in lots of different ways, but that doesn't mean that those messages haven't gone away. They're still there.
yeah,
I still wake up to them every morning, and they still keep me awake at night. And it's and whenever anything goes wrong that I perceive, first place my head goes, bang, you're an awful person, you're a terrible person, everything's your fault. And it's the
yeah,
same messages that all of us experience.
yeah. Luke was talking about it in his talk last week, that he felt autistic people particularly went into negative self-talk probably easier than other neurotypes, and particularly more easily than neurotypical. He calls it predominant neurotype, doesn't he? That we slip very, very easily into, well, it must just be because I'm bad and I'm a bit crap at being a human, and I'm a bit crap at being a grown up, or my job, or being a parent, or whatever else it is that we're trying to achieve. And I wonder whether that's certainly been my experience, both of myself and a lot of, the majority of other autistic people I know. I wonder if that's a mixture of the messages that we receive through wider society and through our own social circles, with which a lot of it is ableism, isn't it? It is that, but you look fine, so, which is awful, but that is what wider society comes down to. So you should be able to, it starts off, doesn't it, with get up 5 days a week and go to school every day, and then come home and do your housework and do your homework, and you shouldn't just be exhausted. I remember coming home from school and going to sleep all the time,
every day,
and getting loads of grief for it, for like, it's just school, it's not, how would you ever cope with work? As it turns out, badly was the answer. Coped with work by sleeping loads and then developing celiac disease, when my body just went, no, you can't eat wheat and work at the same time.
no.
It's societal messages, but there does seem to be, I don't know, do you think it's part of our innate nature, or do you think it's more external influence that makes us more prone to that?
I think there's a combination there. I don't necessarily think that we're more prone to it, but what I think there's a mechanism that happens there, and that we are subject to a very, very significant amount of stigma. Even if people don't know that we're autistic, and we don't know that we're autistic, we're still stigmatized in the way that we behave, and every aspect of us is up for correction or pathologization in some way. So there's that. And then I think our monotropic focus doesn't help, because then that becomes then something that your brain kind of hooks onto, that you then start perceiving negativity even sometimes when it isn't there, that because all of your experiences up until that point have been framed with negativity, been framed with stigma, then you just expect that there's going to be stigma and negativity. So your whole kind of emotional balance gets put out of kilter, and it leans towards that kind of negative self-view, discombobulation, feeling disorientated, all of those things. And those things are happening on a very real level as well, on a functional level, interactions with people and stuff, that disconnect and that discombobulation is there, but emotionally it's there as well. And it's really, I think, framed around that attentional focus on, my experience of life up until X point has been mostly negative, ergo the rest of my experiences are going to be mostly negative as well. And it's really hard to break out of that cycle. And but this is what trauma does to you. It fundamentally changes who you are as a human being. And I know we've mentioned it here before, and I say this a lot, that and it sounds quite flippant and generalizing to say that we don't know what an untraumatized autistic person looks like, but genuinely we don't.
No.
We really, really don't, because the moment anybody who is autistic interacts with any kind of external factor, straight away that stigma comes flooding in. So I know there was a live I did a few months ago, and somebody came on and said actually they lived in a very, very tiny community on a very small island and grew up there until they were about 17 or 18, and then they moved to the mainland and everything fell apart. So we know that it's possible for someone not to hold that negative self-view, but there's always comes a point where you interact with society on a wider level, and then all of a sudden there it is.
Yeah. And now, of course, we've got this, and we're really the first generations to be experiencing this global society, where it isn't just the town you live in, your immediate family, your immediate work colleagues, or colleagues within an educational setting, or however else you might interact with people. Really, as soon as you get online, and I realise that's an active choice, but it is challenging in today's society to choose not to do anything online. once you get online, you're exposed to massive amounts of messaging, and so many more people and so many more expectations and ideals, and um yeah, that much wider, and there's beautiful things with that, isn't it? I mean, Autistic Parents UK wouldn't exist without an online network. That's what we are largely, is an online network, and for me, finding the autistic community was marvelous, made such a difference to my life, made such a difference to my children's lives. So there is positive messaging out there as well that I don't think I would have been exposed to, and lots of people wouldn't have been exposed to. But equally, there is within every factor of life, isn't there? There is that ideal parenting and ideal, work-life balance, and what you should be eating and everything, and it's constant.
And the problem is, by the time you reach that level of more positive connection, a lot of the damage has already been done. A lot of the impact has already been felt. This is developmental. This is stuff that's happening from us to us from when we're babies, from when we're really first kind of socialized. So the sooner you can get that more constructive, more positive kind of connection and understanding and connectivity, and get to that level of kind of support, then the better. The earlier you can have that community, the better. And that's not to say that, that community is always great and wonderful. It isn't always great and wonderful.
No.
You really have to find your people within that community, because that community looks like a lot of different things. There's all sorts of autistic people out there, but and some of them aren't very nice, and some of them are wonderful, and some fall in between. And you just have, like with any walk of life, you have to find your people. But at the minute, we have people going for too long without the opportunity to have that connection, who don't even get the opportunity to find their people within their people, kind of thing. And it's so then you're talking about years and years of trauma and unmet need and lack of self-understanding and all those negative messages. And what do you do when you come out with it? Well, of course you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and not like yourself very much.
Yeah, and that internalized ableism, it can go two ways, can't it? So it can go in the way of, I have to do these things, I have to meet this standard, everybody can do this, why can't there's no good reason for you not to be able to do this, da 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 da. But it can also go the other way of, I can't possibly do that, there's no way that I can achieve that. And I think for some people it can be part of their understanding of self, can't it? That when you realise that you're autistic, probably with other co-occurring neurodivergencies, because it's rarely being autistic alone, that I think some of that, you can travel through both of those. Oh, well, just, okay, that's nice, I'm autistic, but I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing. And slipping into, oh, I'm autistic, actually I can't do any of those things. And so it can be, you mentioned balance, kind of finding that balance.
It is all about, I think there's also a third way where this whole superhero kind of superpower narrative as well, where people are literally telling themselves or telling their children that they can do anything, and that's not realistic either. It's all that lack of balance is all disabling, and that's people either, like you said, victimizing themselves, or or just blithely ignoring what's happening to them and just trying to power through, or telling themselves that they're capable of flying or whatever. All of those things are problematic in isolation of each other. If you can get a bit of balance there between those states, and just look at yourself for a kind of, I'm all right, and I struggle with things, and there are things that I'm good at, and there are things that I might need support with, and things I don't need support with, or things that I can support other people with. Or once you get that balance in place, you start looking at yourself a little bit more kindly. And looking at yourself kindly is a really hard thing to do.
But massively important, and I think probably one of the cornerstones of kind of overcoming that ableism is just being kind to yourself. For me, and this isn't something that I invented, I've seen it from other people, but I find it useful, is to think about, how would I feel if one of my good friends or one of my children or somebody else I loved presented the problem that I'm finding, if they presented it to me, what would I suggest to them, rather than letting my own internal narrative towards myself run, because it will be, stop being so shit, get over yourself, do it anyway, push through, keep going, da 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 da, all of that kind of thing. It would be, okay, so if this was my best mate telling me that they were having this problem, who is also an autistic ADHD, what would I say to them? Because I wouldn't just say, oh, well, get over yourself, you're fine, you know. I find that, I find that a useful way to throw in things. I'm just going to come into the chat because I can see that we have got a few messages. Let's have a look. I'm going to come to the top. This be the verse by Philip Larkin, hints and tips. Oh, when you're thinking about your parents, Philip Larkin, wasn't Philip Larkin who wrote "They fuck you up, your mum and dad"? I think that
I
was
think
Philip
it was.
Larkin too. Perhaps not so keen on his parents. Advocating for my son takes a lot of energy. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, just before we started there, I was saying I'd just done one of my children's DLA renewals, that kind of thing. I just find so spoon intensive. And in fact, I'm going to come to that because I've got some interesting questions for you around official forms of ableism. Biggest source of spoon poverty for me is the system. Yes, Nick. Yeah, I think for a lot of us, it's the constant fight, isn't it? It's really hard to exist and not have to keep fighting for something, either for yourself or for your children. And it does get exhausting. And I think for me, and I see it reflected in a lot of our community as well, part of the exhaustion is the lack of logic and the lack of justice. That you can see, I shouldn't have to do this. It shouldn't be this hard. And part of what I find exhausting is the fact that I'm going, but why can't I just tell you, yes, I need DLA, thanks, that much will do, thanks very much. Because why would I lie? It's not that much money. But it's not.
And it's not worth the effort either. That's the thing, isn't it? The level of punishment you receive isn't worth the recompense in the first place.
It's like, you would jail me if you found out that I was lying. You don't want to go to jail for like £300 a month. It isn't worth it.
No.
I say to my kids how jealous I am of their inherent wisdom to rest and play, and how I'm learning from them. Gorgeous. And I think this is a big generational thing. As far as I can see, we are the first generation for quite a long time who are starting to spread more widely the message that you don't need to earn rest. Rest is an inherent right. And play, you don't need to earn play. Play isn't earned through work. Play is an inherent part of being a human, and we all need it.
Although I would add an addendum to that and say that I don't think it's the whole of our generation that think like that.
Oh no. But I just mean outside of our generation. Yeah. I've never heard anybody else say it.
No. And we see that in there's a lot of educational chatter, really a lot of educational chatter at the minute, mainstream educational chatter about kind of, that we're bringing up a generation of lazy children who aren't resilient enough and react negatively to anything, and they're never going to be able to achieve anything because, they're just soft. I'm like sitting there thinking, we've got the highest levels of mental health distress that we have ever had in children and young people.
Yeah.
That's not because they're soft.
No.
That's because the pressure that is being put on them and the behaviorism which is floating around them and the sense of expectation that we were talking about before. And
it's never, this is it, as you know, and probably a lot of the people on the call know, my children aren't in the education system, but I see through interaction with our community, I get little tastes of what our current education system is like. And I don't think I could cope. I did all right in school because I'm fairly academic, that my brain likes that. Remembering facts and then regurgitating them is actually something that I'm quite good at, and that's really all school wants you to do. So I did okay in school. The social side baffled me, but I kind of found, so my first secondary school, I found some more autistic people, as it transpired, because we're still really good friends 30 years later. And then I got bullied massively and I left. At my second secondary school, I did maths, I don't speak to any of those people anymore because that was not who I was at all. But I did all right. But as the education system is now, I honestly think that it would break me. I think I'd be doing EBSA. I wouldn't be going to school because I found GCSEs really hard because that was when school started with like, but if you don't pass, your whole life will, you'll achieve nothing. You'll live under a bridge. And I found that really hard. And they start that now when the kids are 5. Like that's the messaging from day one.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it. Victoria saying that narrative is reinforced a lot by support services because they don't understand the lived reality. Yes, massively. Absolutely seeing a lot of normalisation of the fight now, and you use that the word as well, which I hate, and I see it everywhere. Resilience of just, and this it's a complete bastardization of the term anyway. The way that it gets used now, of children need to be more resilient and neurodivergent people need to be more resilient in the workplace. It's not even the right use of the word, let alone the fact that it's not true.
It's been adopted again by a capitalist narrative, hasn't it? That it's around kind of less capitalism actually, and more kind of neoliberalism, the kind of Thatcherite, that we have to kind of isolate ourselves and look after ourselves before we think about anybody else, and you have to achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve, and that's about becoming harder emotionally and colder and disconnected from people in order to meet and service your own needs and the end product rather than actually being human.
Yes, it's this hyper individualized individualism, isn't it? That and what it comes down to is that only you matter. Nobody else really matters. You can just achieve anything at the expense of anybody else.
Only you and HMRC.
Yes, that's right. And you do that just by push, and they call it resilience. And then they wonder why we have a massive mental health crisis. Because humans aren't meant to do that.
I mean, that's the narrative right now. They want children to become emotionally detached.
Yeah.
That's what they want. That's what's being asked of them. That's terrifying. And that's behaviorism. Right at the heart of that is behaviorism. That goes right back to the 1960s, early behaviorism of around actually, that what we want is people who don't connect with other people, because people who don't care about other people are more likely to be successful. That's the...
Yeah. And I mean, it's true. We do see it.
Success through whatever lens they look at success through.
This is it. I mean, through a capitalist lens, though, because if we look at people like Richard Murdoch, who is massively successful and owns about 85% of the media outlets in the world, enormous, and one of the richest people in the world, blah 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 blah, and he obviously doesn't care about anybody. I wouldn't bandy about diagnoses, but I wonder about his mental health, because that does not seem like a healthy person to me.
No, it doesn't. And it's really sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad. And it's really sad that like on Twitter, you see lots of educationalists who are literally promoting this narrative right now. And unfortunately, most of them are, well, all of them are what will be defined as right wing. And I feel really sorry. They must be really lonely. And really unhappy deep down, then are they going to get to the end of their lives and feel fulfilled, or are they going to be like, oh, I made loads of money? No.
And everybody hates me, including my own family. And
maybe they don't even see that.
Maybe, yeah. We have digressed.
We've wandered.
I'm going to come into a question before we get too political.
She's not going to be happy with us.
Millie sent a question in. Has anyone had success with DBT, dialectical behavioural therapy, as opposed to CBT, which I've heard isn't great for NDs, to help with ridding themselves of internalised ableism, e.g. by helping practice self-compassion? What would be your thoughts on DBT?
What would be my thoughts on DBT are actually my same thoughts on CBT or any other therapy, in the therapy and the therapeutic process is less important than the relationship with the therapist and the understanding and empathy of the therapist that you're working with. Different methodologies work for different people in different ways. Some are useful, some are not useful, and it's around, you have to explore. It's a package therapy is not right for everybody. So you know, and then you have to kind of dig into the kind of where do the ideas and concepts come from, and DBT can be as problematic as CBT because there are elements of ABA in DBT. It's a behavioral therapy. It's around assessing behaviors and changing mindsets. Any therapy that you go through as an autistic person has to start at a point of validation. That's the only way you can destigmatize yourself, by being validated. And lots of therapeutic practitioners unfortunately don't know how to validate, or don't know to validate, because they're looking through that lens of normativity, or a misperception of what autism is or what autistic experience is. And so quite often it starts from a place of invalidation before you've gone anywhere. So it's less about the therapy and more around kind of actually who you work with and what that collaborative relationship looks like and what their understanding is of you.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. And the medical model is never going to help, is it? Because it constantly tells healthcare professionals that we are wrong, and that our reality is wrong, and our perception of reality is wrong, and all our social interactions are wrong, rather than starting off with they're just different and they're quite right in what they perceive. Yeah. And actually it really does go back to our theme that particularly with sensory perceptions, that so many of us are constantly, as children, as adults, constantly told that what we perceive on a sensory level is just incorrect. We're just wrong. It's not what we perceive. And
that's the same through kind of emoting as well, Ruth, in terms of, you know, if you melt down, well, that's bad behavior, isn't it? That's a tantrum. That's you're doing it for attention. Or, you know, if you respond emotionally in a way which isn't considered normative, laughing if you should be upset, things like that. If your anxiety expresses in ways which aren't normative, all those things are up for correction and gaslighting, and often are. So your senses, over your emotions, you are receiving this constant message that the way that you exist isn't right. So it gets to a point where you stop listening to yourself, or you never learn to listen to yourself because you're not right. You're broken.
Yes. Absolutely. And putting what it can then lead to is putting your entire self, your entire trust of reality in other people and what they tell you is real. And of course that just opens you up massively to be abused in many different ways and on many different levels from many different people. But yes, and I think a lot of us have done that, have lived that, have lived through that, have found themselves, oh my goodness, I found myself in this massively abusive relationship because I don't actually trust myself at all. And so I've allowed myself to be entirely gaslit because actually that's my normal. That's what I expect. That's what everybody does all the time. Yeah.
And what we're really talking about there is masking. Which is why I talk about projecting acceptability, because you're constantly projecting other people's needs on yourself. You're constantly giving other people what they want to see from you rather than who you are as a person. And that's so when people talk about, you know, like unmasking or taking the mask off, what they're really talking about is, I've identified some surface behaviors that I don't like about myself, so I'm going to stop. But what they're missing is this whole developmental trauma that's happened that you have no control over whatsoever. You can't control, like you've been fundamentally, the way that if you believe in kind of, you know, being able to kind of the words going out of my head, this is what COVID has done to me, I've lost words. You know, what was I going to say? If you believe that there was a trajectory for you, that you were going to become a person, you don't become that person because your trajectory has been steered off in a completely different line. So there's no taking off of that mask, because that's you. That's who you've become, you know. And then you have to learn to like yourself and learn to take control as much as you can in order to kind of come to terms with who you are and learn to love who you are. And but you'll never be that person that you could have been, which is really sad, but it's the reality.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just come to the comments and then I'll come out of them again. I'll ask you another question. But then there's a rigid education system that allows no autonomy, agency, just look at the curriculum, which we were just talking about quite a bit there. Oh yes, DLA form says tantrum instead of meltdown. I know, and I just write meltdown, and then write a whole thing about how they haven't got any control of how they are in meltdowns. Um, only got to look at the Department of Education's latest polls about school attendance, Victoria. School attendance drives me potty. I can't. No, I'm going to say it. I can't understand the justification that anybody has, and I know it comes from the Department of Education down, for this whole thing around 95% attendance, because not only is there no evidence for it, there is very strong evidence that it isn't healthy, that actually everybody does need time off when they're sick, and they do need mental health days, and they do need physical health days, and everybody needs rest, and actually 95% attendance doesn't lead to the best educational outcomes, the same as 95% attendance at work doesn't lead to the best outcomes for any agency. Every human needs to rest, and we're much better and healthier if we're allowed to rest. And it infuriates me when I see all so many of my friends and family who've got children attending school, or just in the wider autistic community, obviously particularly through our own social media pages, and schools are putting so much pressure about this 95% attendance. Gives me the rage, because I'm just like, but what are you basing this on other than control? You just want them there 95% of the time because you do.
That's pretty much it. It's because they're paying for it. That's what
Yeah.
that's what the thinking is. They want their best value for money, and that means getting a child in 100% of the time, which is just mental. But it's the quality of the environment, not the quantity of the environment.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
you can have 100% or 95% attendance, but if the environment isn't right for you, it doesn't matter. You're
It
not going to learn
doesn't matter.
anything. And
And
if we put that 95% target next to massively high levels of poor mental health,
yeah, exactly.
what's that telling us?
It's a direct correlation,
It's a
isn't it?
direct correlation between those two things.
I've seen quite a few people who've said, around this whole 95% attendance, and they've said, right, I forced my child into school, literally picked them up, carried them kicking and screaming into school, and then they're put in isolation for the whole day with very little actual, they're given some worksheets. So what's the point of having them in school?
Yeah.
They could be at home, probably learning more from watching CBeebies.
Yeah.
What
You'll get a better educational standard from that than
Well,
feeling
they
safe.
almost definitely would. Yeah. Actually, I should tell you as an example of this. So as I say, I am educating my kids, and my 6-year-old isn't very well today. She's done lots over the weekend, and she does not well. She'll be fine, but she's been a bit foolish today. And she actually staggered up to me only about an hour and a half ago. And she went, "Mummy, we haven't done any English and maths today." I said, "No, sweetie, because there's no point trying to teach you stuff when you're sick, because you aren't going to remember any of it. It's a waste of time. Just have a sleep." But it's, at school, it isn't that now, is it?
No,
It is, well, yes,
no.
absolutely. Come in and do some English and maths, despite the fact you've got a raging headache and your legs hurt.
Yeah. And
Why?
I say this all the time, that we have greater expectations of children than we do as adults, than we do of adults, and that as
Absolutely.
adults, not everybody, but the significant majority of us, if we feel unwell, we don't work.
Yeah.
That if you're employed, there are, and again, not everyone is able to access this for various different reasons, but there's statutory sick pay. You can be signed off work if you need to be, and it's quite easy to go to the GP and get a sick note. That's not a difficult, well, as long as you can get a GP appointment, but it's not, a GP won't question that if you say that you are stressed. That
Yeah.
will happen. But you can't do that with children. And the expectation is that we take them there, this place which is harming them in many ways, or is contributing to their distress in significant ways because their rights aren't being met, then asking them to go into that same scenario day after day after day, whether that's for 10 minutes, whether that's for an hour, whether that's for 7 hours, that's contributing to their poor mental health. That's contributing to their exhaustion. And yeah, it's flooding. That's an actual policy. It's a national policy of flooding, that if we keep exposing the children to the same environment, eventually they'll get used to it, and we're back to resilience again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they can't, they're the problem. The kids are the problem.
Yes, and again, you can see how that would bleed through and totally affect somebody's own internal messaging and their own ideas of self-worth and their ideas around healthy, safe boundaries and bodily autonomy and autonomy with decision making and actually I don't know. I suppose if the parent at home was giving them totally opposing messages and telling them constantly that they, you know, had value and had worth, then perhaps they could power through eventually. But I can't see really how it wouldn't affect you, and you wouldn't have these ongoing, lifelong issues with internalized ableism around it.
They shouldn't have to power through. That's the problem.
No,
It's, you know, the within education in particular, the word thriving is used a lot in education circles.
Yeah.
I don't know any child that's thriving in a school right now.
Mm.
Particularly not autistic children, but any child. I don't know any child that's thriving in school environments right now. Where is the child that goes to school absolutely, truly happy every day, goes and has a wonderful time every day, and then comes home at the end of it feeling super happy? Where is that child? I bet we cannot find that child.
I can think of a couple, but although they are in mainstream education, they're in teeny tiny schools. So I do know some people who live in a very, very remote Scottish island where there are literally 9 children in the school, like, and of all age, that is the village school because that's everywhere on the island goes there. So that is as close as you get really to an individualised education because actually none of the children are the same age. So they do all get, but officially speaking, it's still school. But that's not what you're going to get in a city or a town.
No. And what you said just before around the kind of, you know, the messaging that gives the children, but also the messaging that gives us as parents as well. And I'm very rarely on social media, and I used to love Twitter, and for Elon Musk related reasons, I struggle to be on there now anymore. But even beyond that, I struggle because just the amount of parents, the emails that I get, the messages that I get, parents who day after day after day after day, for whatever reason, are putting their children back in those environments, knowing that it's causing them harm, but not being able to take that step to remove them. Because of the conditioning, because of the fear, because of the worry, the panic, the stress, the not knowing what home education is supposed to look like, and thinking it's, well, I have to spend 8 hours a day teaching my child what all the teachers are doing at school. And all of those narratives play into that. And again, there's a privilege narrative because not everybody can do that, but a lot more people can than think they can.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I see it on both in the autistic sphere and the home ed sphere of people saying, I'd like to home ed, but the one that we see a lot is I didn't do very well in school, so how could I possibly teach my children? And again, that will lead, and in both spheres, and again, that's the ableism, isn't it? That's you didn't flourish in school because school was not an environment that was conducive to you. The comeback, so it's a bit of a painful one if you aren't in a position to take your children out of school, but if you are in a position that you could take your children out of school and what's stopping you is your own fear and doubts around it, is why would you put your children through an education system that has already failed you?
Yeah, that's made you feel the way that you do.
That's made you feel like you were stupid and inferior and that you,
It scares me as well. I don't know many teachers that don't recognise this either.
Right.
That's what's really scary. The teachers are trapped within that system as well. Lots of teachers are. Not obviously hashtag not all teachers. Most teachers that I come across on a kind of day-to-day, and I train a lot of teachers and work with a lot of teachers, are absolutely well-intentioned, want to change things, want to rip up the whole system and start again, but don't, and feel powerless because they're on an individual level. And I say this time and time again to teachers, if you all walked out collectively and said to the government, no, they're not going to sack all of you. I can't sack all of you. You know, it's gonna take that level of resistance in order for things to change dramatically. And at the minute, there's so much fear because, again, it's money, isn't it? It's people fearful of their jobs and thinking they can change from within, which is quite a problematic notion on its own in lots of ways. And it's just we're trapped in a mess. And unfortunately, at the minute, it's become that net of awfulness is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's the autistic kids and the ADHD kids that are kind of being the canaries in the coal mine. But we're seeing
they get
other
squeezed out,
children,
don't they?
other more mainstream children who are able to exist in a more mainstream narrative are now starting to sing that tune as well. And it's I can't see a good way that it ends. And the collateral damage that we're seeing is just enormous, so enormous. I always say, if you can, take your kids out of the system as much as you humanly can, as much as you safely can, because that's the only way you're going to be able to protect them. And I wish I didn't have to say that, but it's true.
And we do have to give a massive caveat. I know we give it in every single one, but don't ever have the impression that Kieran and I believe that home education is the only way to go, or that everybody should be in a position to do it. We completely understand that for a lot of people, for a whole host of reasons, it might not be a viable choice for you, and that is fine. It actually leads to my next question, which is around kind of EHCPs and I mean a little bit DLA, but for DLA, you can kind of write what you need to write and your children don't have to see those forms. But for EHCPs, your child is likely to see that paperwork and it's going to be around for years and years and years. What can you do to help to get that kind of balance where your child's needs are recognised and therefore met without awful ableist language that then again your child might be exposed to, and especially if they see that it's either come from you or being approved from you, you've got that double level.
Okay.
I like to ask Kieran easy questions.
I'm going to start from a place of privilege and work down.
Okay.
So my first place of privilege is don't put your kids through it in the first place. If you don't have to. Lots of people think that an EHCP is like a golden ticket to getting the right support and having the right things in place. It often isn't. I know I could count on one hand the amount of people that I know have got an EHCP that's worth the paper that it's written on. That's the first kind of level. Yes, hello Nick, you are one of those people. And it's the unicorn. It really is a unicorn. And I see parents go through this process over and over and over again. If we just find the right school, if we just get them in here, and then they get them there and it's like, oh no, this isn't working now, we need somewhere else. And you're looking for something that doesn't exist in a lot of ways. Second level down to that is that if you do go through that process, or you have to go through that process for whatever reason, still on the privilege levels here, is getting the right people to write the right reports. Right. So you do not have to have an EHCP that is filled with ableism. The local authority side of it probably will be, but you can have independent private reports feeding into that if you have the privilege to be able to pay for independent private practitioners. There are some amazing private ed psychs out there. There are amazing speech and language therapists, OTs, teachers, independent teachers, all sorts of people who can feed into those EHCPs and write the most wonderful of reports. Again, Nick has got a wonderful report by an educational psychologist that I've been working with for the past 5 years, who has building a network of wonderful independent ed psychs that are kind of dotted around the northeast of England at the minute, but hopefully it's going to extend further. So that's the kind of secondary level of privilege. The third kind of step that I would take there is that if you don't have the privilege to do those things, talk to your kids. Talk to your kids about the reality of the system that they are in, that it's not about teachers being bad people, or it's not about schools being necessarily bad places. They are places that are held back from meeting needs for a lot of different reasons. And we can talk about those reasons. Most teachers, like I said, have really good intentions. Lots of schools have good intention. It's not necessarily that they're bad places, but it's places where bad things happen because of XYZ reason. So we can talk about those reasons and be honest about that. We can talk about the reports and why people might write the things that they do. We can help people understand. Again, Nick's here. Neurobears is a thing. Nick, stick a link in the chat if you want to. You know, that we can help our children understand themselves, but also it's important to help them understand why other people think the way that they do as well.
Yeah.
You know, to get that balance, to understand we're going to experience stigma and ableism. So let's understand why, because then we can have a little bit of power over it. We can be empowered around it. We can feel pity for people who treat us in certain ways or talk about us in certain ways, and maybe try and help them understand that the way that they're doing things is harmful. You know, we can start them on that journey really, really early. So that would be kind of my answer to that if we have these systems that encourage ableist practice and encourage ableist thinking, the least we can do is help our children understand it and understand why it happens, and take the kind of, it's not going to take the threat away, but we can take the fear away. And we can take that internalization of negativity away from them and help them understand that it's not them that's at fault, it's the world around them and the historical narrative that's at fault. And if we can help them to understand that, they can be a little bit empowered over it.
No, I completely agree. When I did this latest form, just because it was recent, when I did this latest form, I actually did tell my daughter what I was doing and what I was writing and what I was saying and why, and was saying I have to word it like this, because if I don't word it like this, then they will just say no, that's fine. If I say to them, "You're ace, our day-to-day life is quite nice. Love living with you. You're a marvelous human being. Don't really have any issues with anything that's going on. It's totally cool. We just cope day to day. Absolutely fine. We have loads of joy." They won't give me anything. They'll say, "Well, that's nice for you. Then you don't need DLA." So I have to write that I brush your teeth and I brush your hair and I help you with this and I help you with that and I help you with the other, which I do, but it isn't a problem for me. But I have to write it in that way, because otherwise, but I'm also, because I'm thinking as she gets older, she's probably going to need PIP. So you need to know this is how we have to word stuff on official forms, even if though it isn't the language that we use in our house, and it isn't how it is what we do, but it isn't how we feel. So I would agree, and I would say that that's something I started to do with my children, and having those conversations around. And this is why, because unfortunately, although we live like this, wider society views us like this.
It's we can shield them from that, but when we shield them from it, we disempower them.
Because
it's the reality. Every time they go out their front door, this is what they're gonna hit, and they can't stay in the house forever. You know, they're gonna interact with the wider world, and the wider world is gonna look at them through certain lenses and treat them in certain ways, unfortunately.
This is it.
Helping them understand that A, that's gonna happen, and B, why, that's a good thing. And protecting them and shielding them from that is only going to set them up to be more vulnerable in the future. Life is awful and hard for many of us, and it will be awful and hard for them in many ways. And the quicker they understand that, the quicker they can build their resilience in the right ways and make sure they've got the right things in place to help them to navigate those situations and be empowered to kind of pass through those situations and to meet their needs outside of those situations. And I think there are a lot of independent professionals at the minute who are using reports and things as a really good opportunity to reframe for other professionals. So, you know, they'll be talking about the ways in which a child needs support, and it might be, you might see this as a deficit, but actually this is X, Y, and Z, and this happens because of this reason. So actually it's becoming a kind of advocacy thing as well, you know. So it's not just about this is a list of all someone's problems. This is a list of support that person needs, and this is why those needs are there. You know, and then what that might mean in a kind of a normative sense. And I think that can be really useful for young people to read as well, you know, to actually, we need to take the stigma out of the ableism in a way, if that makes sense.
And as you say there, if professionals can understand the motivation rather than just the surface level, either what the behaviour is or what the support need is, then they're much more likely to consistently meet it, because as soon as we see a behaviour change, if you don't understand the motivation behind that change, that's why you get that ridiculous, like, oh, your child was using ear defenders, or even you were using ear defenders at work, but now you're doing really well, so you don't need them anymore. Like, no, we're doing really well because we're using them, we still need them. So it's understanding that reason behind, isn't it? I'm going to come back to the chat because it's moved on again. Nick, thank you ever so much for popping that link in there. I know that there was a question. Oh, Millie had said, is there anywhere where you can find a list of, so she's put these people, but I'm fairly sure she put it at the time that you were saying that you were working with a marvellous
Around
educational
EPs and
psychologist.
things, yeah.
Yeah,
They're all northeast, but who was that, Millie?
yeah.
Millie, if you drop me a message on Facebook, we can have a chat, and if I can signpost you, I will.
Super. Uh,
Or
suggested
Twitter,
writing.
or whatever social media you're on. I'm on most of them.
Find him somewhere. If you can't find him, find me, and I'll give you some contact details for him. You can literally contact me through Autistic Parents UK, because if it isn't me, it's one of the other volunteers who does the inbox. I was suggesting to write 2 EHCPs, one for the child and one for others. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I've got a friend who filled out their DLA form for their child for the first time, and obviously had to write all the awful negative crap in it. But literally filled it out again, writing all the wonderful, perfect, what lovely stuff around their child as well, and sent both copies to the Department of Work and Pensions, and still got DLA.
Oh, so,
wonderful! It was like literally, it was like these are all the things I need support with, and this is all the ableist nonsense that you want to know about. But this is why my child's a wonderful person, and I want you to know that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was more for them than anything else, you know. It was more for her.
Yeah, DLA probably just went, yeah, whatever.
They probably did, because it's like spotty teenagers working at the other end of the line there, isn't it?
And I get the distinct impression that there's about 5 people that work at DLA, and they answer the phones and fill out the forms and do everything else, and are probably fairly frazzled and have very little training and tick boxes.
When I was much younger, when I was in about my mid-20s, I went to a talk which was by someone who used to work at the Department of Work and Pensions in the DLA department, and they were kind of they very much didn't work there anymore and had left because they hated it so much, and basically said that basically there's a pile, and say there's 100 DLA forms. This was a long time ago, so I don't know if it's changed, but they would say there was 100 DLA forms in that pile. They've got a quota of about 20% that they let through.
Yeah,
and
that was my impression.
Whether or not they approve of something might depend on factors like how they're feeling. It might depend on whether they've been out drinking the night before and how bothered they were to read things in detail. So there's no, and I would imagine it's still very much the same. There's no humanizing process through it. It's literally about, you know, whether you can understand someone's. One of the pieces of advice was write it all in handwriting, because if they don't understand what you've written, then it makes it more likely they'll accept it. Which is and again, like I said, this was one person 20 odd years ago, but I can see all those things happening. I used to work in civil service. I know how the civil service works. It's it ain't great, you know.
No, and since then, all that's happened is the funding has reduced, and the staff members there have reduced, and the level of competency within the staff, because they're all being paid minimum wage. So it's depressing. Yes. I'm going to write to change what they have written. Does he not understand just right how you can help avoid mainstream vocabulary? The only thing with that, Katerina, was I was talking to somebody recently, and they were saying if you totally avoid mainstream vocabulary in things like EHCPs, then the professionals just don't understand what you're talking about and act like there are zero support needs. That if you frame everything in a totally neuro-affirming manner, the education professionals just kind of go, well, then there's nothing here, then they're fine. Then that's just part of who they are, then that's innate, then we can't do anything about it, so we don't need to do anything about it. So it was that. Yeah, that was kind of what I was getting at, was how do we do it in a way that we're not creating a document that we would be ashamed for our child to read, but equally, how do we do it so that the professionals read it, can see what the needs actually are? Yeah.
Because the unfortunate thing is that we we exist in a kind of happy little bubble where we've got our own language, where we
Yes.
talk about things
Yes.
in a completely different way from the
Yes.
majority of the professional, the majority of the world.
Yeah.
We use terminology about ourselves, which the rest of the world doesn't use. We have understandings of ourselves, which the rest of the world doesn't have.
Yeah.
And so we have, and I have to remind myself all the time, particularly when I'm speaking to what I would, outside of our bubble, what I would describe as lay people, that I have a privilege in the language that I know and use that they don't have.
Yes.
So we have to help them understand it, or we have to use the language that they understand to an extent. Doesn't mean we can't advocate within that. But it's like we have to teach them our language because they
Yes.
don't have the vocabulary that we do. And
No.
it's and that creates extra work for us, unfortunately. But we have to
Yeah.
do it. Otherwise we don't get everything we need. What we want
No.
is the support, and we want the support given in the right way with the right understanding, the right, people leaning into it with the right kind of empathy. But in order to get that, we have to work 3 times as hard.
Yes. Yes, because you have to keep filtering things, don't you? You have to keep running things through different filters. And one of them is your own internalized ableism,
Mm-hmm.
but also you have to run it through, as I say, not being too positive when you're being aware of who your audience is and
Yeah.
what you want them to gain from it. Yeah. Tracy saying in my area, EHCPs are not fit for purpose. Our SIN department have just had Ofsted in and fun. And then Nick saying, said the LA's put family under unnecessary strain. I think that's so common, Nick,
Mm-hmm.
of and just that it seems to be that so many people it's the same. They apply for an EHCP and they're told that they don't meet the criteria, and of course they meet the criteria because everybody meets the criteria. And then they take that and then they get assessed for EHCP and then it's not fit for purpose and they have to keep going back and forth. Just infuriating. Many professionals assess and write reports from a highly diagnostic criteria focused point of view. Yeah, autism as a disorder deficit, and yeah, turning the narrative around is so important. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, PIC forms. I know. I've got another few years before I need to worry about PICs, but I'm just trying not to think about it. I've had the
Did you
real
see what I
concept.
sent you, Ruth?
I was just trying to get to. Were you telling me what time it was?
No. That's there was just a comment that we missed earlier up. That was all, and I
Okay.
thought it was quite an important one.
The way that these chats come up is it just does it through whoever sent the most recent message.
I
It
know.
can be infuriating to find. So from Sonia, my mum helped out a lot, but she shames me for my weight and tidiness of our home. She doesn't appreciate I work 3 jobs and regularly can't leave my kid at after school clubs. Yeah, it makes me feel guilty and resentful. Yeah, really common, really common messages. And I think sometimes people don't even realise this. And weight is a massive one that I think
Mhm.
a lot of people, particularly older generations than us, don't even realise that the stuff they're saying is not true, it's not healthy, it's not helpful. And this idea that there's an ideal size and it should be tiny for everybody. And that the idea that everybody has access to the same, everybody should be able to do the same amount of exercise, everybody should be able to eat the same healthy diet, as if a healthy diet is the same for everybody. It's getting out there. Messages are getting out there that actually you can be all different sizes and still be completely physically healthy. Um, and that being thin isn't necessarily being healthy, the same way that being bigger isn't necessarily being unhealthy. But I would say it's slowly getting out there, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I think there's
Oh,
a without generalizing, I think there's a real mum-daughter narrative there
yeah,
around the shaming and the because I see that a lot in a relationship not too far away from me in my house. Between a
yeah,
certain person and their mother, who may or may not be my wife.
yeah,
You know, and that I'm I think it's a lot of parent insecurity being applied to children, parents' insecurities about themselves, about their own stress, their own anxiety, their own trauma, particularly if we're going to look through this lens of, this is autistic people don't just spontaneously manifest, they come out
Yes.
of other autistic people. And that it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with the fact that my parents were just like me in lots of ways, and
Yes.
had unmet need and were traumatized and had become, my dad went to alcohol and my mum went to throwing herself into supporting other people, and forgot that she had children, and well, didn't forget, it just was other people were too more important. And it's like people stick their heads in whatever stops making them think about their own worries and trauma and insecurity.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of mums and daughters, that mum-daughter relationship, that happens through a lens of criticism. And I don't even think the mums often know that they're criticizing like that. I don't think
Yes.
there's a conscious awareness of it. It's just, it happens that you don't exist to the standards that they exist to, and their anxiety says, well, that's a problem for me.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law barely spends any time. When she comes, she doesn't even take her coat off, even if she's staying for like an hour
Yeah.
or more. She very rarely takes her coat off, and she openly admits she doesn't come into our house because our house is untidy compared to her house.
Right.
And she's the one who's cleaning out the underneath of her cupboard under the sink every week.
Right.
So so
That's
she's
very
got her own,
clever.
she's got her own things, and
And
that's really hard, and that's been hard for my wife to deal with.
yes.
That she's had this level of criticism her entire life, which is really subtle, not
Yeah.
really open, but it's very
Yeah.
much there. And it's hard for me because I didn't have that relationship. My parents weren't critical like that. They had their own issues,
Right.
but I never got that level of criticism for them. But it's so sad.
And I think weight with women, and probably particularly
Mhm.
autistic or neurodivergent women, is a particular thing because there's this underlying message about taking up space that with some of my family members who are on the bigger side, that a lot of that negative messaging around the size that you are is about how much space you take up and how much people need to accommodate you and how much people need to be aware that you're in the space. And the underlying, of course, is that you need to be invisible and people should be easily able to ignore you and you should slip in and out of any space unnoticed, and that is much easier if you are basically just a skeleton with a little bit of skin on you than if you're a big person. And so yeah, it's definitely messaging that I've seen within my own family, but also messaging that I've seen outside as well, that part of the issue with weight and women, or those assigned female at birth, is that it's that, but also it's because you should be quiet and you should be pretty enough that people can kind of go, that you aren't so ugly that people have to stare at you, but you shouldn't be so pretty that you distract people. It's all of that kind of, it's all of that really. You should be invisible, you should be tiny, you should be quiet, you should be compliant, because basically we don't want to notice you, we don't actually want to pay any attention to you, and if you're bigger it's harder to ignore you,
Yeah.
and it's deeply unhealthy.
And
um
I think it's particularly with our parents and looking through that lens of, this is quite often, regardless of the impact is negative, the impact is awful. Experiencing that side of things from your parents when all you want is, love and support that's unconditional, and you want them to big you up and hug you and hold you, and sometimes they can't do that, and
yes.
that does come from a place of trauma.
Yes.
It doesn't take away the impact, but knowing that can be, and I've just seen Katiko's comment there about, that it can be useful to see that it's coming from a place of trauma, but unfortunately the only thing that we can do around that is protect ourselves with boundaries.
Yeah.
So like my parent is going to come and my parent is going to do what they do. I can't control them, so I either have to end my relationship with my parent, or I have to recognize that when my parent comes, I need things in place before and after in order to
Yeah.
make sure that the impact on me is as minimal as possible. And then, like Katiko said, also we have to think about our children as well, and what they
Yes.
see and what they pick up and what
Yeah.
messages they're getting. So actually having an open and honest dialogue with your children about what maybe grandparents are saying and what they do and how they act. And,
Yeah.
it's not because they're bad, they can't help what they do because it's coming from a place of trauma, but that doesn't mean that we have to take those messages on for ourselves.
Yes. Massively.
That's
Yes.
about them and it's not about us.
Yeah. Yeah. We have lots of those kind of conversations around, grandma experienced this growing up and grandpa experienced this, and they're doing their best with what they've got, but that does mean that they still say these things sometimes, and it's not appropriate, and it's not okay, and it's not something that we repeat, but equally we're not in a place where we can stop them from saying those things.
And having that
um
honest dialogue with our children is how we break that cycle of generational trauma. That's the
yeah,
only way we do it, is by having open and honest discussions with the next generation about our flaws and about the previous generation's flaws, and about openly accepting them and learning from it. And doing that together collaboratively. That's the only way we break generational trauma.
yeah.
Otherwise, we just keep repeating the same cycles over and over.
Yes, yes, yeah, that's it. I know, what we were just talking about there. I know that that is a generational message that's just come through the women in my family.
Mhm.
You must be quiet, you must be small, you must be ignorable, down and down and down and down and down and down until me. Be loud, have boundaries, tell people no,
Yeah.
lots. Um, Tell me no, even when I say it's really frustrating, still tell me no.
And it's
Uh,
when, if you really sit down and look at your families, you will see those cycles coming
oh
all
yeah,
the way through. And it's like my wife's family are very patriarchal in a lot of ways, and it's allowed some really problematic behavior to come through the light in terms of male behavior coming through the light, because the men have been put up on a pedestal and they can do no
yes,
wrong. And
yes,
so actually, if we can break that, and we look at our children who are assigned male at birth, and we actually think, well, actually, how do we support you not to be like that and not to engage in those behaviors, and how to be more empathetic and understand actually that often problems come from us and not from outside of us. And actually, if we can do those things, then we can change those patterns, and we'll have healthier children in the future.
yes, yeah. And it's all, all of those isms. I know we're talking about ableism today, but all of those isms, they quite often come as a package, don't they? That that ableism is part of white supremacist culture, which obviously is a lot of what racism is about. And then it's also part of, as I'm saying, it comes down, a lot of that kind of fat phobic stuff comes down particularly through women and those assigned female at birth, and we start seeing the sexism side. And so if we start breaking apart part of that ism, then we can spread it into the other isms as well. That it's, that it's also, you can have attraction to any other adult that you feel attracted to, totally fine, no problem at all, and be whatever size feels good for you, and rest when you need to rest, all of that kind of stuff. It kind of starts feeding into each other, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It's all
I
about
just,
removing fear.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think something that's come up a lot here tonight as well is removing the stigma and having conversations, even when they're hard, of saying, I'm experiencing this thing, and it's tricky. And maybe even I don't know what the solution is right now, but I know that there has to be another way to do this. One of the things I wanted to touch on just from the chat, and then we'll finish up because I am aware of the time, is that PIPs come up quite a few times there, after I mentioned the dreaded PIP forms, and there have been a few comments about PIP. Millie has put quite a good comment on there that if you are applying for PIP, to use their own point system to guide your answers, and she's put a link on for the point system. So anybody who hasn't seen that, and then Victoria's put a link on for a Fight Back for Justice as well, who I've only heard good things about.
Yeah, there's still a
Um,
few charities knocking around. There are not as many as there were, but there's still a few charities knocking around that will help with forms and applications and stuff as well. There used to be
yes,
a lot more than there are now, but you just have to dig a little. I think
yes.
Bridget's Bridget's question is a good one to finish on.
how do you recover that one?
Mhm.
How do you recover from years of stigmatization and trauma to the extent that you are convinced you are a terrible, broken person with absolutely no worth at the age of 26? What do you think, Kieran? I'm only smiling like this because I love to ask Kieran awkward
I know.
questions, but he has brought this for himself, asked me to
I thought
ask
this for
him.
myself. And the reason that I couldn't have let that one not go, to be
No, no, I'm so pleased
honest.
you pointed that one out.
So I can't tell you personally what to do, but I can say that for me, by the time I'd got to 26, I was on my third or fourth suicide attempt. Hated myself, absolutely hated myself, viewed myself through that lens of I'm just a terrible waste of space, a waste of oxygen, can't do anything right, I can't do anything. I would bizarrely I met my then to be wife by that point, and we had a long distance relationship for a few years, and we would usually end up in a Pizza Hut before one of us got on a train back home. Um, and Pizza Hut was my place to unleash my tears. That was where all my frustrations would come out, and I don't know why. I think it was maybe the act of kind of because I didn't want to separate from Michelle. I didn't want to go, so I think that enabled things to come out that wouldn't normally have come out, and that's where my frustrations about like I can't even pick up the phone and talk to someone, like I cannot use a telephone, and all of those things and all of that kind of self-hatred kind of came out. Um, so the solution, there is no short-term fix to that, but the long-term fix is what Ruth and I were talking about earlier around understanding yourself,
Mm,
really understanding yourself. I don't mean that, oh, I'm autistic, I know what that means now. I
no.
mean, I'm talking years of work. Um, uh, Connecting with the right people until you can get to the point where you know that they're the right people. Even if you speak to someone in Facebook Messenger once a year, they're the right person if you can pick up a conversation where you left it, you know, that there's no judgment on that or anything like that, that you can just pour your heart out or someone else can pour their heart out to you. um Around kind of um sorry, it's really hard. It's because I'm not very well as well. um it's just years of work and putting the right things in place around you, understanding yourself to the point where you can take a little bit of control over your life. You can maybe create a little bit of privilege for yourself where you know what you need and you can try your best to meet those needs. And that takes deep work. Sometimes that might mean therapy. For some people that might mean therapy. For others, therapy's never something that's really worked for me, and probably because I never found the right therapist. I've not without years of trying and all of those kind of things. I think now we have more privilege than we did 20 years ago when I first started doing this journey.
Mm,
That we have loads of neurodivergent therapists now, so there's people with knowledge that we can access who can give you the empathy, and then it's just about finding the right person. So there are things in place in the world now that didn't exist 5 years ago that can help us and support us, but it's time is the biggest one, and that self-understanding, it's the key to everything, but it
mm.
takes time. It's not something you can fix overnight, but you are an absolutely valid person, and I know that's not easy to hear, but you absolutely are. And you probably do have people around you that will tell you that and love you, but it's really hard to hear it from them sometimes. So
Mm.
as a stranger, if I can say that to you, maybe you can believe that a little bit more. And then you might come away from this thinking, yeah, I am. But then tomorrow you might go back to feeling how the way you were. But that's because of what things have done to you. It's not because of who you are. You are not broken. You're an absolutely valid, wonderful human being.
I think as well, I think 26 might be quite a hard time
Gotcha.
because you haven't, for most people, haven't had independence
Bridget's
for
son, Ruth.
ages. Oh, Bridget's for your
Yeah,
son.
his son.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, but for him as well, it's yeah. I also found 20s really, really hard and was in a very abusive relationship and self-harming massively and all of that kind of thing. And I think I didn't really know who I was in my 20s. I hadn't recovered from all the traumatic stuff from my childhood. And so I went into adulthood and put myself into more traumatic situations and kind of got myself more traumatized. And I hadn't really had I don't want to say strength because that's awful and that is kind of like resilience. I hadn't had the realization that I was enough of a person and a valid enough person to remove myself from situations that were actively harming me at that point. And actually, I didn't do that until I had children. Having children for me meant I did it for somebody else. It was easier to do it for somebody else than it was to do it for me.
You weren't
When I had
empowered.
children, yeah, yeah. When I had children, I was like, well, I've got to now. Now I've got to leave this situation because it's not good for them.
And that's not
Yeah.
us encouraging your son to go out and have children.
No, not at all. But just yeah, just for your son, yeah, doing what you can to support him and keep him as healthy and alive as you can for now, and having faith that he will, in all likelihood, come out of it, especially if you can connect him with the right people to help him have that constant validation that he is valid and he is perfect and wonderful and who he needs to be, and to have people keep feeding that into him till he starts to believe it himself.
And that can
Ear,
start by being in spaces like this. I mean, obviously, he's
yeah,
not a parent, so this isn't necessarily the right space for him to be in, but there are other spaces of equal value where conversations like this happen, and but he's got to want to be there himself. It can't be somewhere where you put him, or he's got to take that little bit of a step and want to kind of, you can hate yourself, but still not want to hate yourself.
yeah,
And if you can kind of dig into that bit, that right now you don't like yourself very much at all, and you've got very good reasons not to like yourself at all. But if you want a pathway out of it, there is a pathway, and you can get to a place where you do like yourself, and and you can realize that it's not all you, and you're not a bad person. But again, that comes back to what I was saying earlier about therapies, and you need to feel that validation, and you need to know that other people are experiencing what you're experiencing as well. And until you get that, those light bulbs don't go off, and you're stuck because you feel like you're on your own.
yeah, yeah. Some of it as well can be, when you're supporting other people, can be doing what you can to remove shame. Because I think a lot of the reason that for many of us, we either don't remove ourselves from unhealthy situations and or we don't seek external help and support is because we're ashamed and we feel that we're in those situations and we feel that way about ourselves because it's true and because it's what we deserve. And so it can be, yeah, doing what you can to remove shame, even if, even if they're in a situation that society would deem very shameful, I'm trying to think of examples here now, that they're struggling with addiction, that they're struggling very obviously with mental health issues, they're putting in they're in a domestic violence situation, that they're in anything where society actually makes it hard and encourages those shameful messages to yourself, doing what you can to speak louder than society and try and get through the shame that it isn't their fault, and that lots of people have been where they are, and as Kieran says, when you're ready, there are people who will help you out of it, and there are pathways to come out of it. Thank you, Bridget said thank you. Thank you, Bridget. I hope that's helpful. Quite a lot of people there as well saying that becoming a parent change things for them. And as I say, that's not a saying, just get your son to go out there and impregnate people, it will be fine. That's
So maybe
not
it's
what we're saying.
no, that complicates things in a whole other way.
No, yeah,
But
that
you're
just
right.
gives you
You're
different
absolutely right. It does change your priority. I mean, it's literally what kick-started all the change for me, and and I
yeah,
wouldn't advocate doing it for that purpose. You've got to have children for the right reasons. But yeah, it's definitely game changing when you kind of look at that little person and you think, something's got to change here because it's what's happening isn't good enough.
yeah. And it can be a big motivation to reflect on and challenge that internalized ableism, especially if our children are also autistic, and or ADHD and or any other neurodivergent, because those messages that you can kind of excuse telling yourself, it's much harder to excuse telling them to your children, isn't it? For a lot of us, that you can tell yourself, I'm a bit shit and I just need to clean the house before I can sleep. But you would never say that to your kid. You would always allow them to rest. So yeah, that kind of goes back to an earlier one, doesn't it? Of
Yeah,
framing your
and from an adult child's perspective, that expectation, just because you haven't given it to them doesn't mean that they don't also have that or different expectations of themselves. And a lot of that self-hatred will still be coming from a place of, I'm not normal, I can't do things, I can't do XYZ, and other people can, and I should be doing this, probably seeing other people of their age getting married, going off on holiday or whatever, and they're not maybe in a place to do that. So that maybe is the place to start around, if we're going to validate that, yeah, life's shit. Let's talk
yeah,
about that. Let's be real about that. And
yeah,
I think a lot of parents of adult children who are in that real negative place are often quite scared of having those negative conversations because they're worried that they make things worse and they're worried that their
yes,
children latch onto that. But you've got to have faith that if you're validating someone's experiences, then that's the beginnings of a pathway out of those experiences.
yes,
And obviously you have to be cautious around that and walk a line, but so they don't become even more trapped in kind of
yes.
negativity. But if we validate the negativity, we can look for the positivity.
Yeah, it's starting where they are, isn't it? And I think that's why it can be so helpful for autistic adults to find other autistic adults. It's because then you've got people who start realistically where you are,
Yeah,
and it is often starting off with that. Yeah, it's shit. Yeah, this bit that you're experiencing. There are other bits of the autistic experience that are marvelous, but this particular bit that you're in right now, yeah, that's shit. I had a conversation with my daughter only earlier today. I had one of those days where I'm just randomly anxious. Don't really know what I'm anxious about, but I keep getting like whole body floods of adrenaline. Like for me, my hands go all tingly and I feel stuff in my feet and I feel stuff in my stomach. And I don't really, it might be about Christmas. I don't know. I just feel randomly stressed. And I was driving my daughter, my daughter had been seeing one of her friends. I was driving my daughter home and I got one of these rushes. I was like, oh, and just talked to her about that experience. She's a PDA, so she was just going, yes, mummy, that is where I live. That is my constant lived experience. And so it's just opening up that this bit, this bit of the autistic experience is a really rubbish bit. And it's a bit that we don't really enjoy. And we have to, and then we were talking about, because the last time she had it, I was saying, well, you've spent a whole day in bed because you needed to, but you'll have excess adrenaline because your body creates lots of adrenaline because that's part of your neurotype. And if you don't move your body can't rid itself of adrenaline. So then we were talking
overcompensates.
about, okay, I've got some bits to do when I get home, but then I'll do some exercise and I'll allow my body to move and get rid of this built up adrenaline and hopefully work out of it. But yeah, going to what you were saying there, Victoria, in the chat, and definitely what Kieran's been saying as well, it is about having those just open and real conversations.
And understanding yourself, or
Yeah,
understanding the narratives enough, if it's not you, that you can have a conversation with someone about what they might be feeling. And
should we leave it there?
think that's a good place to start.
Given that we've overrun by about half an hour, like we usually do.
I'm surprised I'm still like upright, you know.
Kieran's still conscious. We brought him nearly to tears, but he's still conscious. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to everybody who's been contributing to the chat as well. It's been lovely to see you all. I hope it's been useful. Hopefully you all, I think this is only us anyway, isn't it? So you probably all know where we are, but if you don't know us, find us, find the website, find whichever channel you use us through, come find us, we're here to support you. Lovely to see you all. Beth had specifically said thank you to you because I could see that you were replying to some of the messages in the chat with some practical admin things. So thank you very, very much. Have a nice Christmas. We managed to get all the way through this with hardly saying the word. Have a peaceful, quiet Christmas that feels almost exactly like every other day. Probably even keep the food the same. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.